Okay, so this first one is about linguistic analysis homework reference, is what the file's called, but it's about historical language change. So the data we were given had data from PIE and also from Attic Greek. I'm not sure what PIE stands for, but it would be the mother language of Attic Greek. So it's some kind of Greek. And fortunately, we had this written out in the IPA instead of in Greek symbols. So we don't have to read Hellenistic symbols today, which is really helpful. Especially since they would change over time anyway, so it wouldn't really give us a good understanding of how the pronunciation had changed. So we want to know how they started pronouncing words differently, as they transitioned from being PIE to being Attic Greek. So what we want to do is we want to look at how the pronunciations changed. So let's look at number 1. There are 2 letters. This KW is 1 letter. Even though it's spelled KW, it's like one sound, like kwa, kwa, kwa. It's like a W glided K. So K is a velar consonant, and the W glide means it's got a glide. Okay, so it's a glided velar consonant. And then it turns into a T, which is a voiceless dental consonant. Okay, they're both stops, so nothing has changed on that regard. But we do see that the W glide has gone away and the place of articulation has changed. So this was velar and this is now dental. Okay, and then we see the same thing here. So this was KW again and it changed to T. Okay, it's worth noting that when we do this, we basically ignore vowels because linguists kind of notice that vowels change all the time. Like we even see that in our own language. Like people pronounce vowels differently in English and they can definitely understand what each other are saying. So vowels are pretty much negligible, but the consonants are what we really want to see, how the consonants are changing. So in this one, that KW changed to a T. The E is the same, but it wouldn't really matter even if it was different. And then it's a T, T. Then this W changed to a T. But that may or may not be relevant. The O changed to A, but again, we don't care. R changed to R, E, E, S, S, okay? Then on this one, we have P and P, E and E, but we don't care about vowels. N, N, O, K, W changed to T. And then we have KW changes to P. Oops. And we have this T changes to S. This S at the end doesn't really matter that much, just because it's at the end, it's been appended to the end. So this would be a case of epenthesis, but when it's at the end like that, right after a vowel, again, it doesn't necessarily matter unless we start seeing a really strong pattern for that. Yeah. Then we have KW changed to P again. And the T and the R and the S are the same. And we have Y changes to H. And this KW changes to P. R is R. And we don't care about the A, because again, we really just don't care about vowels. Okay, so now we have a GW. A G is also a velar consonant. It's a velar stop or a velar plosive. The only difference between G and K is that G is voiced and K is voiceless. Okay, and we're seeing that it's changing to D. And remember, before we had KW, which was a voiceless velar stop with a W glide, changing to a voiceless a voiceless, okay, this is not the one I wanted to look at. Up here. Changed to T, which is a voiceless dental stop. And now we're having GW, a voiced velar consonant, voiced velar stop with a W glide, changing into a voiced dental stop. Okay, so that is a pattern because the place of articulation changed in the same way here as it did here. They're different letters because these ones are voiceless and these ones are voiced, but the pattern's the same. Okay, and then we have, well, sorry, I didn't finish. L and L, BH is changing to PH. So BH is an aspirated, voiced bilabial consonant, bilabial stop specifically. Sorry, I keep leaving that part out. And this is an aspirated, voiceless bilabial stop. Okay, so everything's the same between BH and PH except for the voicing. This is voiced and this is voiceless, but they are both aspirated, they're both bilabial, and they're both stops. Okay, so we can just keep going like this. GW changes to B. This M is not really an M because it has this little O on the bottom. It's on the real file, it's like right underneath, but I didn't know how to do that, so I wrote it as a subscript. But it's not an M, it's a voiceless M. So I don't know, it's functioning as a vowel is basically the point. So it changes to an A, but we don't care because it's functioning as a vowel and it changes to a different vowel, and that happens all the time in linguistics, and it doesn't matter. And then we have this T, which is changing to an S. So T is changing to S, and T and S are both what is it? They're both dental voiceless consonants, but T is a stop and S is a fricative. So T has been fricativized into S. This GW changes to B. We don't care about this because that's a vowel, just like A. This, I suppose, is changing to I, but we don't really care. It doesn't really matter. And like these are essentially all vowels, so it doesn't matter. This GW is changing to B. This BH is changing to P. Okay? And BH is a voiced aspirated bilabial stop, and P is a voiceless bilabial stop. So it is no longer aspirated and it is now voiceless. That's the only difference. This was voiced and aspirated. This is voiceless and unaspirated. The little h is what makes things aspirated. Then we have this part, which changes to this. And notice that this D is not changing. Okay, so up here we had a D. I think we did. That's some crazy. Okay, it must come later on. Yeah, we'll skip. Down here, spoiler, this DH changes to a TH. But notice that right here, this D does not change to a T. So that's going to be important. DH changes to TH, but D does not change to T. That's important. We also have right here, that's more of the same. R and N are the same. This S at the beginning is gone. I forgot to make note of that, but we would say initial S is elided. That means it goes away. And then N is the same, but this crazy thing, GWH, so it's a voiced velar stop, which is aspirated and has a W glide. So it's a bilabial glide, an aspirated voiced velar stop with a bilabial glide. That's what we call this whole thing, and it's all one consonant. The W and H are not separate consonants. They're just showing you that you pronounce the G a little bit differently than you would under normal circumstances. It's all one consonant though. The whole thing is changing to a an aspirated voiceless bilabial stop. So it was velar, and now it's bilabial. And it was voiced, and now it's voiceless. And it used to have this bilabial glide, the W, but now it doesn't. It used to be aspirated, and it still is. Okay, then we have this turning into that. And we have the same thing again here. And we have the same thing again here. And we have the same thing turning into something different here. So that's going to be relevant too. So we're going to have to figure out what's different between these two words that makes these three turn into aspirated T, but this one turn into aspirated P. Then we come down here and we see that W is elided, it goes away, but the K is the same, and the vowels don't really matter. W is elided again here, and it's elided again here. It goes away in all those cases, and here. So W is going away. We see that this aspirated G, or an aspirated voiced velar stop, is changing into an aspirated K. So an aspirated voiceless velar stop. So the only difference is the voicing. So it was voiced, and now it's voiceless. The aspiration is the same. And the place of articulation is the same, and the manner of articulation is the same. So the place of articulation is velar, and the manner of articulation is is a stop or a plosive. That means the same thing. And then down here, this H is going away. We can mark that if we want. And then, but it's like really common for initial H's to just go away. So it didn't seem relevant to me, but I guess it is. And then here we have aspirated D turning into aspirated T. So this is an aspirated voiced dental stop, and it's turning into an aspirated voiceless dental stop. So the only thing changing is the voicing. Okay, so I was just running you through that, but I did not expect you to remember any of that crap. What you want to do is you want to start sorting this. And you don't even have to like put labels on these consonants. You don't have to call them like, oh, voiced or voiceless or stop or fricative or anything like that at first. I was just letting you know what was going on. But what you want to do is you want to just organize it. So I broke this into steps for you. Step 1, figure out what changed. And the hint is to just look at the consonants. For now, we're ignoring the vowels, just like I said. So in these three, KW is turning into T. And you don't need to know anything about KW or T at this point. You just need to notice that KW is now T. And then these three, KW turns into P. So that's interesting that KW turns into T here, but it turns into P here. So we're going to have to come back to that and figure out what the difference is. And then GW turns into D in this context, but in these contexts, it turns into B. So we'll have to come back and figure out what's going on. These four, GWH is turning into PH. But in these three, GWH is turning into TH. So we'll have to figure out the differences between these two. And then we have all these examples of W being elided, or W going away. It was there, and now it's gone. Then we have one example of DH turning into TH, two examples of BH turning into PH, one example of GH turning into KH. So you can't necessarily do a lot with one example, but something to notice is all of these really go together. The reason for that is the only difference between DH and TH is the voicing. The only difference between BH and PH is the voicing. And the only difference between GH and KH is the voicing. So altogether, we have 4 examples of aspirated voiced stops turning into aspirated voiceless stops. So you could make a rule that says an aspirated voiced stop goes through devoicing. And according to this data, that happens every time we have an instance of an aspirated voice stop. There aren't any examples to the contrary. And then we have 2 examples of T turning into S and 2 examples of this voiceless M turning into A. Okay, so we just got to summarize, write it all down at first, and then we got to stare at it. So step 2 is to figure out the phonological context of the changes. Okay, so I've written some stuff down. I am saying KW turns into T before E, and KW turns into P before O and R. Okay, let's look. So you can see I'm not looking at this. I don't care about what it changed into. I just care about what it was originally. Originally, every time it came right before E, it turned into T. And every time it came before O or R, it turned into P. Okay, so that's what I wrote. I wrote, it turns into T before E, and it turns into P before O or R. Okay, and then I did the same thing with G and GWH. And I just wrote down the context in which the pattern happened. And then I did W is always elided, which is true. I couldn't find any evidence to the contrary. There weren't any examples where a W was in PIE and it was still there in Attic Greek. It always went away, so I said always. And then I wrote down this, that DH turns into TH always, BH turns into PH always, GH turns into KH always. And I grouped them together for the reason I explained before, that all of these are instances of a voiced stop turning into a voiceless stop. And all of them are aspirated. I did find examples of, so it being aspirated does matter, because do you remember I showed you, there's an example somewhere up here. I don't know where it is. But there's an example somewhere up here where it doesn't change if it's not aspirated. So it was cuadros. Where is that? Right here. Yeah, so this D right here doesn't change to T because this is not aspirated and this is not aspirated. So it is specifically the aspirated consonants that go through devoicing. Which makes sense because aspirated means that you're putting like extra H sound, like it's more breathy. So it's like duh, 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 kind of. I'm emphasizing it too much, but with that extra sound, it just, as you say it faster and over time, it's just more natural to just like not use your vocal cords at all and just start saying t, t, instead of duh, duh, t, t, duh. You see how it would make sense. Anyway, but just a normal D without the aspiration, it doesn't have any reason to change to T. So it doesn't, it stays D. But anyway, continuing, we have T turns into S before I, but T stays T before W and E. And then voiceless M always turns into A. Okay, so now we have those rules, and now we can do some musing about, what that means. Basically, you just need to write stuff down with their phonological terms. So, step 3, summarize. So I summarized, I put all this data together, I said velar consonants with bilabial glide undergo dentalization before high frontal vowels undergo labialization otherwise. Okay, so that's just a fancy way of saying exactly what we wrote down before. But on the quiz, it was written like with these words like velar consonants, bilabial glide, dentalization, like all these fancy words. And if you don't know what these words mean, then you should just look at that IPA chart because it breaks it down for you and you can reference that. Okay, I also said based on these 3 pieces of data that aspirated voice plosives undergo devoicing. And we can say always, but it's kind of implied if you don't specify a different context. W undergoes elision, so it means that gets deleted. T undergoes fricativization before high frontal vowel I. That's the only time when it does that we have recorded. It's really important to specify that because if I don't say this, it would imply that T always undergoes fricativization, but that simply wasn't the case. As you remember, T stayed T before W and E. And then I'm not really sure how to write this down, and I'm not really sure that it matters. It's something that I noticed, but like I said before, I'm pretty confident that a voiceless M would be treated as a vowel, so it changing to a different vowel isn't really that interesting to linguists. The other thing that I forgot to write down is initial S undergoes elision as well. Okay, so that's it. That's what happens. That's how it goes down. So then, these are predictive rules, and you can refer back to them. Oops. And you can test it. Like, you can go back through the data set and make sure that this, is what's happening. So you can start with the PIE one, and you can change it according to these rules and see if you get the Attic Greek, and you should if you did it right. Something to notice is that originally we had written this. Here, I'll copy it right here for just a minute. This, what I just copied, isn't written in our summary. The reason for that is because these two are a 2-step process. Okay, so it starts out doing this. So GWH turns into DH. And then that DH. Wait, where is it? Oh, I must have a gap in my notes. See, look, this is why you should always check. No, hold up. Sorry, I don't have a gap in my notes. I was just reading them wrong. So this is not before E. So I was looking up here, but that's specifically before E. This is not before E, so it's in the otherwise category. So it turns into BH, and then BH turns into PH. So altogether, this ends up turning into PH, but it goes through a 2-step process where it turns into BH first, and then it turns into PH. And it's the same with this one. So before E, it turns into TH first. Well, no, sorry. It will end up being TH. But the way that works is it first turns into DH, and then DH turns into TH. So that's a 2-step process there. I feel like I covered everything. But yeah, like this takes a lot of time, but that's basically it. Like you just need to be willing to take the time to really organize the data and think about it. You cannot, maybe you can, maybe you're a genius, but I can't just know the rules by just looking at this data. I need to like write stuff down and take notes and reorganize everything and, really compare things side by side. So that's my recommendation.